Story 1. It was the fall of 2021, and I was on a short work trip in Tennessee. Nothing exciting, just a few days of meetings in a quiet, smaller city. I'd picked an old-fashioned hotel, one with dark wood paneling and a faint smell of something, like lemon polish and old carpet. It wasn't fancy, but it felt solid, comfortable in a worn way. The leaves outside were just starting to turn fiery reds and oranges, and the air had that crisp, wonderful bite that means autumn is truly here. My room was on the second floor, overlooking a side street that was mostly quiet, save for the occasional car humming by. I usually felt pretty safe in hotels. I'm not a nervous person, and I've traveled alone plenty of times. But this trip felt different. It started subtly, like a faint static in the background. On my first evening, I was heading down to the lobby to grab a soda from the vending machine. As I waited for the elevator, a couple emerged from the room next to mine. They were maybe in their 50s, dressed a bit strangely for a hotel in Tennessee. The man wore a dark, heavy coat, though it wasn't that cold indoors, and a brimmed hat pulled low. The woman had on a bright red scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, though her dress was light. They both turned to look at me, and that's when the first little shiver went down my spine. Their eyes. Not angry, not especially curious, but still, too still. Like they were looking through me, and at me, all at once. They didn't smile, just stood there for a beat too long before walking past, their footsteps surprisingly soft on the carpet. I watched them disappear around the corner, and I remember thinking, they're a bit odd. Then the elevator arrived, and I shook it off. Probably just tired. The next morning, I went down for the free breakfast. It was a small room, and only a few tables were taken. I was pouring myself some orange juice when I saw them again. The couple from next door. They were sitting at a table in the corner, facing the door. The man still had his hat on, which felt weird indoors, especially at breakfast. The woman's red scarf was still wrapped tight. They weren't eating. They just sat there, sipping from coffee cups, watching the room. As I sat down with my plate of lukewarm eggs, I felt their eyes on me. I tried to act normal, pretending to be very interested in my phone, but I could feel it. The kind of stare that makes your skin prickle. When I finally dared to glance up, the man quickly looked away. But the woman, she just kept staring. Not with a mean face, but with that same unsettling stillness. She barely blinked. I quickly finished my breakfast and hurried back to my room. Over the next day, it happened again and again. I'd see them in the hallway or walking through the lobby. It felt like they were always there, always just a bit too close. One afternoon, I was leaving my room to go out for some fresh air, and they were standing by the ice machine, right near my door. They weren't getting ice, they were just standing. When they saw me, they went quiet, and those same unblinking eyes followed me as I walked past. I sped up a little, my heart thumping against my ribs. I tried to tell myself I was being silly. It was an old hotel. Maybe they were just elderly and had nothing else to do. Maybe they liked to sit in the lobby. But the way they looked, it wasn't normal. It felt like they were waiting. For what? I had no idea. That evening I was back in my room, trying to unwind. I'd ordered some takeout and was watching a movie. Around 9 p.m. I heard a soft, rhythmic thudding coming from the wall next to my headboard. It was faint at first, then a little louder. Thud, thud. Thud, thud. It sounded like someone was gently knocking on the wall, but not with their knuckles. More like a flat palm. It was definitely coming from the room next door. Their room. I sat up, my movie forgotten. Was it just a coincidence? Were they moving furniture? But it was such a strange, steady rhythm. Not random. Then, the thudding stopped, and I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching sound. Like fingernails against wood, or something trying to scrape its way through a surface. It wasn't loud enough to bother anyone else, but in the quiet of my room with my nerves already on edge, it sounded deafening. It came from the wall, right where my headboard was. I pulled my phone out and pretended to scroll, my eyes darting in the direction of the door. What if they were trying to get my attention? What if they were trying to listen? I could feel my throat tighten. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy and still. The scratching stopped. Silence. I held my breath, listening. Then, a voice. A low murmur, muffled by the wall, but it was there. I couldn't make out words, but it was definitely human, and it sounded like it was coming from right next to my bed. My head was pounding. I got up very slowly, trying not to make a sound. My phone was gripped tight in my hand. I walked to the door, double-checked the deadbolt, and then did something I never do. I pushed the dresser in front of it. It felt ridiculous, but I needed something, anything, to make me feel a little safer. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The hotel felt utterly silent now, except for the frantic beat of my own heart. I kept picturing their faces, those eyes. What if they knew I was alone? What if they knew my room number? There was no logical reason they should, but the thought just popped into my head, chilling me to the bone. After what felt like an hour, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They were slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. My breath hitched. They stopped, right outside my room. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body tense. I could almost feel someone standing there, just beyond the thin barrier of the door. Then, a faint, almost silent click, like someone was trying the doorknob. My eyes flew open. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The dresser was pushed against the door, but it was just a piece of furniture. It wouldn't stop anyone, determined. I heard a soft sigh from the other side of the door. Then the footsteps began again, slowly moving away. I stayed absolutely still for a long time, listening until I couldn't hear anything but the blood rushing in my ears. I did not sleep much that night. Every creak of the old hotel, every whisper of the wind outside made me jump. I pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling like a small child, completely vulnerable. The next morning, I packed my bags in a frantic rush. I did not bother with the complimentary breakfast. I just needed to get out. As I dragged my suitcase down the hall, I risked a glance at the room next door. The door was slightly ajar. I stopped, my heart leaping into my throat. Through the crack, I saw a sliver of darkness. No, I thought. I didn't want to know. I pulled my suitcase faster, almost running to the elevator. I did not see them in the lobby as I checked out, and I did not look back. I drove the long way home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. The crisp autumn air now felt cold, not refreshing. I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. I never saw them again, but sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room, I think I can still hear that soft, rhythmic thudding, and then the faint scratching coming from right beyond the wall, and a shiver, cold and sharp, goes right through me. It's a feeling that never quite goes away. The feeling of being watched, and the knowledge that sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones you can't explain. Story 2. It was supposed to be a dream vacation, a week-long cruise through the Caribbean, just me, Alex, and my little sister Maya, and our parents. We'd never been on a cruise before, and the idea of waking up in a new sunny place every morning with endless food and pools and shows sounded amazing. It was the fall of 2021, and we were all ready for a break. The ship itself was huge, like a floating city. So many decks, so many people. At first, it was all excitement. The giant buffet, the swimming pools, the movie screens by the main deck. Everything felt bright and noisy and fun. Then, about 2 days into the trip, I started to notice him. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, always wearing a light beige suit, though everyone else was in swim trunks or shorts. He had thin, sandy-colored hair combed neatly to one side, and wore dark sunglasses that hid his eyes. I first saw him in the main dining room during dinner. He was sitting alone at a small table near the window, not really eating, just holding a fork and looking out at the ocean. It was a bit weird, but I didn't think much of it. Lots of people on cruises are alone. The next day, Maya and I were at the pool, splashing around. I was trying to teach her how to float when I saw him again. He was sitting on a lounge chair, a good distance away from everyone, but facing directly at the pool. He had his sunglasses on, so I couldn't see his eyes, but his head was tilted, like he was watching. I nudged Maya and pointed him out. "Look, it's the beige suit guy." Maya just giggled and splashed me. That afternoon, I decided to explore the ship's library. It was a quiet, cozy room tucked away on one of the lower decks, with comfy armchairs and shelves full of books. I picked out a paperback and settled into a chair by a small porthole. I was just getting into the story when I felt it, that prickly feeling you get when someone's watching you. I looked up slowly. He was there. The man in the beige suit. He was standing near the history section, his back to me, but then he slowly turned his head. With the sunglasses, I could feel his gaze. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there for a moment, then turned back to the bookshelves. He was not pretending to look at books. He was just standing. A little shiver went down my spine. It was strange. Twice could be a coincidence, but 3 times felt like a pattern. I decided to ignore it. Maybe he just liked quiet places. The next couple of days, it got weirder. It wasn't just that I saw him. It was where I saw him. If Maya and I were at the arcade, he'd be walking, slowly past the door. If we were at the ice cream bar, I'd catch a glimpse of him through the glass, standing on the deck outside. Once, I was waiting for an elevator, and when the doors opened, he was inside, alone, facing the back wall. He did not turn around as I got in. He just stood there, completely still, until the doors opened on my floor. It felt like he was always there, always on the edge of my vision. I started to get really creeped out. I mentioned it to my mom. "There's this weird guy who keeps showing up everywhere I go," I said. "He always wears a beige suit and dark glasses." Mom just smiled. "Oh, honey, it's a big ship with thousands of people. You're bound to see the same faces around. Maybe he just has a favorite spot, like the library." She didn't seem worried at all. That just made me feel more alone with my weird feeling. One evening, my parents had gone to a formal dinner, and Maya was with them at the kids' club. I decided to hang out in the main lounge, where a band was playing soft music. I found a comfy chair in a corner, watching the lights reflect on the ceiling. I felt pretty safe, surrounded by all the other people. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard a very soft clearing of a throat. I looked up. It was him, the man in the beige suit. He was standing right next to my chair, so close I could smell a faint scent of something like old wood and sea salt. He still had his sunglasses on, though it was dim in the lounge. "Enjoying the cruise?" His voice was low, raspy, like he hadn't spoken in a long time. My heart jumped. I tried to act normal. Yeah, it's great," he nodded slowly. "Lots to see, lots to do." He paused. "I saw your sister earlier. She's a very spirited child." My breath caught in my throat. He saw Maya? How? When? And why did he know she was my sister? I felt a sudden cold dread spread through me. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. He was watching us. "We were at the kids' club," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, like I wasn't scared. He just nodded again. "Yes. The yellow bouncy castle. She loved that." My blood ran cold. The yellow, bouncy castle was inside the kids' club behind closed doors. You couldn't see it from the outside. How did he know that? How did he know that precise detail? I stood up quickly. "Well, I should probably go. My parents will be back soon." I did not have parents to go to, not at that moment. He didn't move. He just stood there, his sunglasses pointed at my face. "It's a long way back to cabin B12, he said, his voice still that low rasp. "Especially late at night." Cabin B12. That was our cabin number. My cabin number. My head swam. How did he know? There was no way he could know. I hadn't told anyone outside my family, and our room key cards were just plain. Panic flared. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I practically ran out of the lounge, my heart thudding so hard it felt like it would burst through my ribs. I practically sprinted through the brightly lit hallways, past laughing people, until I reached our cabin door. I fumbled with the key card, my hands shaking so much I dropped it twice. Finally, I got the door open and burst inside, slamming it shut and locking it with the deadbolt. I stood there, leaning against the door, breathing heavily in the dark cabin. The ship hummed around me, but all I could hear was my own frantic heartbeat. He knew. He knew our cabin number. He knew about the bouncy castle. He wasn't just someone who happened to be everywhere. He was watching us. I spent the rest of the night curled up in my bed, staring at the cabin door, convinced he was going to try the handle. Every creak of the ship, every distant laugh from the hallway, made me jump. I kept picturing his expressionless face behind those dark sunglasses, and hearing his raspy voice saying our cabin number. The next morning, I refused to leave the cabin until my parents and Maya were back. I told them what happened, about him knowing our cabin number. My dad looked serious for a moment. Then he said, "It's a small world, Alex. Maybe he overheard us talking in the dining room or saw the number on your keycard when you were checking in." But the way he said it, I could tell he was trying to reassure himself too. My mom just kept saying, "It's a safe ship, honey. There are cameras everywhere." The rest of the cruise was a blur of fear. I tried to stay with my parents at all times, and I avoided any part of the ship that wasn't crowded. I saw the man in the beige suit a few more times. Once, briefly, in the buffet line, and then just as we were docking on the last day, standing by the gangway, watching people leave. He was still wearing the sunglasses, still perfectly still. When we finally got off the ship and onto solid ground, a huge wave of relief washed over me. I looked back at the giant ship, gleaming in the sunlight, and for a moment, I thought I saw him standing on the top deck, a tiny figure in beige looking down. I quickly looked away and walked faster, pulling my suitcase behind me. I never saw the man in the beige suit again, but sometimes, when I'm in a new place, or just walking down a quiet street, I get that cold prickle on the back of my neck. And I can still hear that raspy voice, whispering Cabin B12. It reminds me that in the sunniest, most fun places, sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones you can't quite explain or ever really get away from. Story 3. It was a really long flight. 10 whole hours from Toronto to London. My parents were taking me and my little brother Finn to visit our cousins. I was excited, but 10 hours in a tiny airplane seat felt like forever, even with movies on the screen in front of me. My seat was by the window, Finn was next to me, and then Mom was on the aisle. Dad was a few rows back with his own movie. I thought about trying to swap with Mom later so I could stretch my legs. But then I saw the person who was going to be sitting beside me for the whole flight. He was a man. Probably old, like my grandpa. Maybe older still. He had very white hair that was combed flat to his head, and he wore a very neat dark blue suit, though everyone else was in comfy sweatpants or t-shirts. He had a small, thin black suitcase on his lap when he sat down, which was odd since most people put their bags up above or under the seat. He didn't say hello. He just sat down, put his suitcase on his lap, buckled his seatbelt, and stared straight ahead. He did not look at his screen, did not open a book, did not pick up the airplane magazine, just stared at the seat back in front of him. The plane took off, making that big roaring sound, and soon the cabin lights dimmed for the long night flight. Finn fell asleep pretty fast, snoring softly next to me. I tried to watch a movie, but I kept feeling a strange tingle, like someone was watching me. I glanced over. The man was still just sitting there, perfectly still, his eyes wide open, staring. He hadn't moved an inch. No sleeping, no yawning, no blinking much. It was super weird. I closed my movie and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about him. What was he doing? Why wasn't he moving? A few hours later, the flight attendant came by with drinks. I asked for apple juice. She offered the man a drink, but he just shook his head slowly, still looking straight ahead. "No, thank you," he whispered. His voice was like dry leaves crackling under your feet. I tried to ignore him. I really did. But then I noticed something. He had taken a small silver box out of his pocket. It was old and shiny, kind of like an antique locket, and he was rubbing it with his thumb, over and over, making a tiny, quiet shh sound. He wasn't opening it, just rubbing it. It was the only movement he made, a slow, gentle rub. Then, he leaned a little bit in my direction. just a tiny bit, but enough that I could feel him closer. "Are you excited?" he asked, his voice still that low, raspy whisper. Yeah, for London," I mumbled, my heart starting to beat a little faster. He nodded slowly, still rubbing the silver box. "London is lovely, especially this time of year. For visiting cousins, yes?" My stomach dropped. How did he know about my cousins? I hadn't talked to anyone about it on the plane. We hadn't been loud about it. My parents and I had only talked about it quietly. How did you know?" I asked, trying to sound brave, but my voice was shaky. He gave a tiny, slow smile. His lips barely moved, just stretched a tiny bit. "I hear things. I see things." He paused, and his eyes, which were a very pale blue, shifted to look at me, over the top of Finn's sleeping head. "And your brother, Finn. He snores just like my nephew used to. The one who lived near the big park." Now I was truly scared. Finn's nickname was just Finn, and we lived right next to a big park back home. This wasn't a guess. This was knowing things he shouldn't know. My mind raced. Had he seen our luggage tags? But they just had names, not details like big park. Had he overheard my parents talking? But they were rows away, and Mom was asleep now. I froze, trying to think of what to do. I couldn't get up, since Finn was sleeping on the aisle side. The aisle was blocked by my mom. I was stuck between the creepy man and a sleeping brother. "My cousin Sarah," he continued, as if he was just talking about the weather. "She has red hair, just like your mother. Very pretty red hair." My mom did have red hair. It was a bright, fiery red. How could he possibly know? He hadn't seen her. Up close, not really. She'd been in her seat since we got on. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I wished I could just disappear. I tried to make myself small in my seat, turning my head to the window, pretending to look out at the dark sky, though all I could see was my reflection looking back at me, scared. He chuckled, a low, dry sound. "Don't be shy, Liam," he whispered. "It's a long flight, plenty of time to get to know each other." My name. He knew my name. My whole body was shaking. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I was so scared I couldn't make a sound. I just sat there, pressed against the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could feel his gaze on the back of my head, though I was not looking at him. I could still hear the faint shh of him rubbing that silver box. The rest of the flight felt like an eternity. I didn't move. I didn't try to sleep. I just stared out the window, pretending to be asleep or busy. Anything to avoid looking at him or acknowledging him. Every now and then, I'd feel him shift or hear a faint sigh, and my stomach would lurch. Finally, the pilot announced we were beginning our descent. The cabin lights came back on, bright and yellow. Finn started to stir, blinking. I felt a rush of relief so strong I almost cried. When the plane landed, I practically jumped out of my seat as soon as the seatbelt sign clicked off. My mom was already awake, looking tired. "Did you sleep, sweetie?" she asked. "No," I mumbled, pulling my backpack on quickly. "Just want to get off the plane." I practically ran down the aisle, not daring to look back. I did not see the man in the dark suit get off the plane. I did not see him in the airport. My parents never seemed to notice him. But even now, sometimes, when I'm in a crowded place or on a bus or a train, I get that weird feeling, the feeling that someone is watching me. And I remember the dry, crackling voice, the quiet shh of the silver box, and how he knew my name, and Finn's, and my mom's hair. I still don't have an answer for how he knew all those things, and that's the scariest part.